Hello and welcome back to the podcast with James and Sarah. And this time we're going to be talking about the Toronto clown riots. So, to kick things off, we need to look at Toronto in the summer of 1855. And at the time, it was a burgeoning provincial city of about 40,000 people. And at the time, it was famous for its muddy thoroughfares and, more importantly for our story, a very volatile social atmosphere.
All right, so you've got this crowded, muddy, and restless city. Yeah, that just sounds like dry tinder waiting for a spark, really.
Oh, definitely, yeah. So on the 10th of July, 1855, you had the S.B. Howe's Star Troop Menagerie and Circus arrived with their really catchy name. And they were a prominent American touring company. And they'd set up their big top and animal enclosures at a space called Fairley's Lot. And that was right near the intersection of Front and Scott Streets. Obviously, I have no idea where they are because I don't know Toronto in the slightest.
No, neither do I. But I can imagine a circus arriving back then would be quite a big event, and I bet the locals they must have been desperate for that kind of entertainment.
Yeah, I think it tells you what the world was like when people were desperate for entertainment from a circus because nobody's
Yeah,
desperate for it now. But
no.
yes, they were hungry for it. Um, but the real trouble, as we're going to get to, starts 2 days later on the evening of the 12th. So after the day's performances, in inverted commas, a group of circus personnel, specifically the clowns, head out for some recreation, again in inverted commas, at a
Mm,
local tavern and bawdy house, which was run by this woman called Mary Ann Armstrong.
a baldy house.
A
Yeah,
bawdy house.
bal- that sounds like the sort of place where things could go downhill very fast. So what
Yeah.
kinds of people would you get at these places?
So it was at the time it was a known haunt for the city's working class men, and that included members of the local firefighting brigades. So the atmosphere
Right.
was immediately tense because these circus performers were seen as Yankee outsiders, Americans coming over the border, and the local patrons were intensely loyalist and parochial. So they really, really didn't take kindly to having Americans in their bawdy house.
Oh, right. So you've got all this sort of nationalistic tension and the local
Yeah.
pride, and it's all kind of simmering in one bar. Yeah, that's not
Oh
good, is
yeah.
it? So, but
No.
what actually triggered the violence? Because obviously you're saying riot, so there's violence. What triggered it?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So it's it's deceptively trivial. So a clown who has been identified as someone called Myers got into a dispute with a member of the Hook and Ladder Firefighting Company Number Two, and according to eyewitnesses, this Myers playfully or maybe provocatively knocked the hat off of a firefighter's head.
He knocked his hat off. Do you know
That's all he
that
did.
that almost sounds funny, like a prank, but I'm guessing not in 1850s Toronto. Probably wasn't perceived that
Um,
way.
no, definitely not. So it's a very hyper masculine and tribal environment. So it was seen as a grave personal insult and a direct challenge to this fella's honour. So the situation spiraled instantly into a violent brawl.
Right, and just to, I should have put this in before, but when you say firefighters, they weren't like the ones we have today, like Fireman
Correct.
Sam.
They
No.
so these ones operated more like a coordinated street gang, and they rallied their comrades and quickly overwhelmed the clowns. So even though the circus performers were athletic, they were just outnumbered.
Right.
So they had to retreat toward Fairley's Lot with the firemen shouting and chasing them all the way.
Oh, sounds like they barely made it back. Was anyone hurt at this stage, or?
On the first night, these physical injuries were minor, but the damage to the fireman's pride was seen as being quite significant. And this perceived disrespect towards the city's defenders, as you will, set the stage for a larger, much more organised retaliation the following day.
Okay, so the tavern fight is just the opening act.
Yeah.
as it were. But I'm confused. How did this turn from basically a fallout over a hat into a full scale riot?
So to be answering that, we have to look beyond the bar stools and at the very soul of the city at the time. So Toronto in
Sounds deep.
1855 was a place defined by very deep sectarian lines and dominated by a single massive force, which is known as the Orange Order.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of them actually. But how much
Yeah,
power did they actually have over a city of what, 40,000 people, I think you said?
40,000 people. Yeah, they
Yeah,
had immense power because they were like a Protestant fraternal organisation that
right.
effectively controlled the local government and emergency services. And
Okay,
they fostered a fierce loyalist identity that was openly hostile to anyone they saw as an outsider,
right.
especially Americans or those who were Roman Catholic.
So I guess our circus performers fit that outsider profile perfectly.
You're spot on, yeah. So being American Yankees, the troop were viewed with an inherent suspicion and seen as a threat to that rigid social order that the Orange Lodges had maintained.
Right, so these firemen from the night before, they weren't just angry drinkers, they were actually part of this whole power structure.
Definitely, yeah. So back then, firefighting brigades like Hook and Ladder Company 2 functioned more like competitive, semi-militant social clubs
Right,
than the public servants we think of today. So membership was a point of intense pride and almost always overlapped with the Orange Order. And these men were notorious brawlers who frequently fought rival brigades for the right to extinguish fires. And they operated with total impunity because of their political connections.
right, okay. So by knocking off the hat, which sounds funny,
Yeah,
Myers wasn't just starting a bar fight, he was accidentally picking a fight with one of the most powerful groups in the city.
correct.
Right, oh
So
dear.
yeah, absolutely spot on. And the local police offered no protection because they were an extension of that tribalism. At the time, the Toronto police were a patronage based organisation where nearly every officer was an Orangeman, and the chief
Oh.
and his men were beholden to the same fraternal loyalties as the firefighters.
That is a terrifying thought.
Awful,
If
isn't
you're
it?
a
Yeah,
visitor, the law is only there for the insiders. That's
correct.
yeah, that doesn't sound
Yeah, so it does create a really dangerous environment. So by the
yeah.
morning of the 13th of July, the story of the tavern fight had been completely embellished across the city's bars, and the clowns were painted as aggressive foreign agitators who had assaulted Toronto's heroic defenders. So completely turned out proportion.
So the mob, they didn't even think that they were committing a crime.
Nope. The rhetoric at the time was so successful that that mob saw the destruction of the circus as an act of civil justice. And this
Mm.
obviously then sets the stage for a systematic assault on Fairlie's lot. And they marched in with quite assurance that the authorities wouldn't lift a finger to stop them. They were just going to go in and do what they wanted.
Oh. So when this civic justice finally arrived at the circus
Mm.
gates that afternoon,
Yeah.
what did it actually look like? What was going on?
It would have looked it would have just been absolute carnage. So by the afternoon of the 13th, that simmering resentment we talked about finally boils over into open violence, and a massive mob, bolstered by off-duty firefighters and members of the Orange Order, marched straight for Fairlie's lot. And the circus troupe were actually in the middle of preparing for their daily performance when this riot turns up at their door.
Right, and these rioters, they're not just showing up to protest. They're literally armed and they're ready for a fight. It sounds like.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, exactly. So they roll up there with stones, clubs, various makeshift weapons, and this wasn't some spontaneous outburst. It was coordinated. It was a coordinated effort to dismantle this foreign presence in Toronto, and they quickly overwhelmed the perimeter of the encampment, and the destruction was just systematic and brutal.
When you say systematic, what were they doing?
So they went for the infrastructure first. They
Right.
overturned the heavy wagons, slashed the canvases of the big top, and then as the mob surged forward, the performers and their families had to flee for their lives. And some of them actually ran into the nearby woods to hide, whilst
Oh,
others tried to defend their property.
awful to think of families being
Yeah,
chased out of their homes. And I know this sounds strange to think of it, but I mean, there would have been animals, you know,
yeah.
they must have been terrified.
Well, yeah, it must have been. I suppose you look at it as a scene of total anarchy. And the
Yeah.
reports from the time described that terror of the animals as the mob pelted their cages with stones and even tried to set fire to the wooden structures. But I think that, yeah, the most harrowing part was the specific targeting of people just going after them because they're in there, not because they were involved.
So they were actually hunting down hounds at this point.
Yeah, specifically the ones involved in the brawl at
Right.
Armstrong's the night before. So anyone caught by the mob was subjected to severe beatings. And this obviously then fills the air with the sound of splintering wood, the roar of the crowd, and the screams of the animals. And this
Oh.
was happening in the heart of what was supposed to be a disciplined British style capital.
And how long did this go on for? Was it hours or?
Oh yeah, several hours. Yeah, this mob effectively held Fairlie's lot under siege, and it gives an unmistakable message. In 1855 Toronto, the protection of the law didn't extend to you if you offended the city's powerful fraternal factions. So by the time the crowd finally disperses, this troop was financially ruined and physically traumatized. So all that was left was a smoking ruin of broken wagons and torn canvas. That's the end of the circus.
No, that just sounds like a total failure of civilization. And but hang on, you said earlier the authorities were there, they were present. So if they were the police, if they were standing right there, why didn't they stop the slaughter?
Well, because they didn't want to. This
Oh,
is a very, very scandalous part of the entire siege. Throughout those hours of violence, uniformed police officers were actually standing right there at the lot.
so they basically had a front row seat to all of this destruction going
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, they did. Yeah. But they remained completely passive. So that there's eyewitness reports later saying that these policemen were standing amongst the rioters, having casual conversations with the Orange Order members
Mm.
and the firefighters as they literally just tore the circus apart. So not a single arrest was made whilst this riot was going on. They made no attempt to protect the performers, their families, or the property.
That's just total betrayal. I can't even get my words out, but
Yeah,
of public trust. And
yeah.
so the people that were meant to enforce the law were essentially acting as spectators, or in a way, you could say they were accomplices.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this fallout from that blatant dereliction of duty was immediate and fierce. So once the dust settles, the city's newspapers and its moderate citizens
Mm.
were absolutely outraged. And the failure of the law was so absolute that it forced a formal commission of inquiry into the conduct of the force and the mayor, a fellow called George William Allen.
Okay, and I assume this investigation found exactly what we talked about earlier.
It confirmed everyone's suspicions. The
Right.
investigation proved that the police force was so deeply embedded within the Orange Order and local political gangs that it was physically incapable of doing its duty impartially. It wasn't just a few bad apples, the entire system had been compromised.
So how do you even go about fixing a system that is that broken?
Well, luckily, it's not something I've ever had to do or worry about. But in this
No.
case, they dissolved it. So
Yeah.
in 1855, the city took this unprecedented step of dismissing the entire police force. Every single officer was let go, and a new board of police commissioners was established to create a professional discipline service from scratch.
Oh, so that's where the modern force comes from.
Definitely, yeah. So 18, we can then move on to 1859, and the modern Toronto Police Force is created, and it was
All right.
modelled after Sir Robert Peel's Metropolitan Police in London, the
Oh,
Bobbies.
oh, okay,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, so this new force was designed to be politically neutral, wearing standard uniforms and adhering to a strict code of conduct, specifically to prevent the kind of sectarian bias that allowed the clowns to be hunted down in 1855.
Do you know, it's quite an incredible legacy actually that a violent riot um, over someone getting their hat knocked off
Yeah,
ends up
yeah,
being the catalyst for the professional policing that we see today. It's pretty mad.
yeah, yeah. It is what is quite a small thing. It has become quite a landmark event, and it
Yeah.
marks the moment Toronto transitions from a frontier town ruled by your tribal factions to a modern city governed by professional institutions.
Mm.
And the SB Howe's Star Troop, never came back. But
Oh,
they're yeah, what they went through changed Canadian urban history. And the day the clowns were hunted was ironically the day Toronto decided it finally needed a law that served the public rather than just your fraternal interests.
wow. Well,
Yeah,
a dark chapter, but quite a vital one, I think, for understanding the city. So thank you for bringing the details of this event to light. It's interesting.
a pleasure. Yeah, a pleasure. Thank you all for listening.